This is Deep Night Whispers. Tonight, we open a file that was never meant to be found. Begin with a road that doesn't want to be a road anymore. A narrow strip of cracked blacktop unspooling through southern West Virginia, the hills closing in until the sky is just a seam between trees. The town ahead is small enough to be mistaken for an afterthought on the map. Odd, in Raleigh County, a place where mail finds people by recognizing the shape of their lives rather than the numbers on their doors. At the turnoff, the asphalt breaks into gravel. Then the gravel gives up and becomes dirt. Tires grind the earth to powder. Past the switchbacks, the hillside is stitched with vines and the skeletons of porches that used to lean toward company. Nothing leans here anymore. Things hold themselves up if they can. Neighbors mention a house set back from the road, screened by brush like a secret the land refuses to say out loud. They mention the Whitakers, a family whose surname has settled into the valley like coal dust, fine enough to coat everything, heavy enough to change the color of memory. They don't talk much, the neighbors say. They don't invite. If you go, go with respect, and don't come empty-handed. In places like Odd, history is not written. It is inherited. The approach comes slow. A rusted gate, a patchwork fence, a property line policed by dogs whose bark is equal parts warning and duty. Beyond the fence, a narrow yard where appliances retire to rust, and a kitchen chair sits where the sun lands best. The house itself wears the season badly, boards warping, windows dim with the breath of years. The front steps sag. The door is a mouth that has learned not to smile. Knock once. A voice answers from the shadows, the syllables soft, uncertain, as if the words had to come a long way to find air. Then figures at the threshold, faces lined by weather and habit, eyes that measure visitors not by what they say, but by what they bring. Food is a language everyone understands. So are cigarettes, bottled water, the kind of groceries that keep for a while. Small offerings in a place that has been asked for too much. Names emerge. Betty, Lorraine, Ray, spoken without ceremony, received without surprise. The camera, if there is one, stays low, unsure whether it is welcome or being tolerated for the sake of the gifts. Introductions are not performance here. They are survival. People uncertain of the world outside their door will meet it the way they've met every other thing, carefully, on their own terms. Stories about the Whitakers have traveled farther than the road that leads to their yard. Some stories come wrapped in cruelty, words like inbred, tossed like rocks from passing cars. Other stories arrive as whispers, generations of isolation, marriages that never left the ridgeline, a family tree whose branches circle back until the leaves recognize each other. In these hills, privacy was once armor. Now it is accusation. Outsiders come to gawk. Outsiders come to film. Outsiders come to make themselves feel like insiders somewhere else. But a camera can also be a witness when it remembers how to be quiet. The first minutes are a lesson in patience. The door opens wider. A chair is offered. The yard becomes a room with green walls and sky for a roof. Conversation finds its own pace. Words come and go like shy birds. When they settle, you do not rush them. Ray is there. Stocky, vigilant, a man whose throat carries sounds it did not choose. Barks and grunts that arrive when language is asked to do too much. He communicates anyway, with quick glances and gestures that have meaning if you've spent enough time learning the family's grammar. Lorraine's laughter breaks unexpectedly, bright and childlike, then fades as if startled by its own echo. Betty keeps watch from the doorway, a steady tide of comment and correction, the household's keeper of names and order. What you see is not spectacle, it is continuity, a life handed down intact, because there has never been enough force here to break it. The family lives in a loop. The same rooms, the same yard, the same path to the small local store on good days. A television murmurs in the background. Calendar pages lift and fall. The dogs patrol and are thanked for it. The house, patched and repatched, holds. This is coal country, where the mines paid out in wages and took their due, in bodies. When the work left, it took the spine out of whole towns. What remained were pockets of people, valleys that keep to themselves, hollows where the world thins to a thread and a family becomes its own weather. Poverty is not the point of the story, but it is the temperature of every room. You feel it in the cupboards, thin but not empty. You see it in the repairs, resourceful, approximate, good enough until they aren't. You hear it in the way the Whitakers answer questions, cautiously, with a sideways glance to make sure the question and the questioner can be trusted. Rumor says intermarriage happened here, the kind that maps a circle instead of a line. Rumor also says a lot of things, some true, some practiced until they sound true. The camera does not verify rumors. It documents people. And the people in front of it, hair brushed, shirts clean, nervous but present, are not monsters. They are a family that endures, a family that has learned to entertain curiosity without surrendering dignity, because dignity is sometimes the only thing that can't be taken. On the porch, the interviewer keeps the questions simple. How long have you lived here? Who built the house? What do you like to do on a warm day? The answers come in fragments, and the fragments make a whole. Berry-picking stories, creek-walking stories, church when a neighbor offers a ride, a cousin who used to fix tractors until his hands shook, a winter when the power went, and the woodpile held just long enough. Small things, but whole lives are made of small things. There are moments that hit like quiet thunder. A pause after someone says a name that doesn't visit the house anymore. A glance towards a bedroom where someone still sleeps at odd hours. A sudden stock stillness when a car rolls past the gate and the dogs start up again. Trauma leaves instructions. The body obeys even when the mind has made peace. You see it and look away, not from disgust, but from respect. The conversation drifts, returns, drifts again. Laughter answers laughter. A neighbor stops at the fence, calls hello, checks that all is well. In towns like Odd, neighbors are not optional. They are infrastructure. They know the Whitakers. They know when to step in and when to let the day keep its shape. Mutual aid here looks like rides to town, paid tabs at the store, someone remembering to bring bottled water when the well goes rusty for a week. Inside the house, the air is cooler and smells of old wood. A couch bears the weight of decades. A calendar from last year still hangs because the picture is nicer. The kitchen is a puzzle, solved daily with what's on hand. Ray sits by the window, the light soft on his face. He watches the yard as if it were a television show that gets everything right. Seasons, visitors, the slow return of the dogs when they've barked themselves out of worry. Questions about the past are answered cautiously. Questions about the future are met with a shrug that is not hopelessness, just honesty. In places like this, tomorrow is a practical problem. Weather, food, rides, medicine, a new pair of shoes when the souls give. Tomorrow is also a promise kept by repeating today. The camera learns what it came for only when it forgets what it came for. It stops hunting for a scene and accepts the fact of presence. This family, in this valley, surviving in a way that makes sense to them and to no one else. The word the world uses inbreeding, is a blade tossed from a distance. Up close, the blade dulls. Up close, you see routine, affection, frustration, humor that arrives like a gift and leaves before anyone owes it. Thanks. When the visit ends, there is no crescendo, just handshakes, a promise to return with photographs and prints, and a bag of groceries left by the door, because goodbyes should always carry weight. The dogs calm, the yard swallows footsteps, the road out remembers how to be a road. Night comes fast in the hollows. The last light pools in the low ground, and then is gone, leaving only the sound of insects and a house where the television plays to keep the silence from becoming a wall. In odd West Virginia, the Whitakers close their door the way they always have, without ceremony, without apology, another day surviving itself. What begins as a rumor ends as a portrait, not of pathology, but of endurance. And endurance has a history. The first photograph of the Whitakers to reach the wider world was never meant to travel. It was taken in kindness or curiosity, depending on who tells it, and it carried with it the same unease as any image that crosses the line between looking at and looking into. 1. The visit. The man behind the camera was named Mark Laita, a photographer who had made a career out of finding the places where the edges of America blur. In 2004, he followed a rumor. Locals said there was a family in the hills of odd West Virginia that didn't take kindly to visitors, that barked like their dogs, that lived in a house older than most of the graves in the nearby cemetery. He drove for hours. When the road ended, he walked. And when he reached the gate, rusted, leaning, guarded by the same dogs every neighbor warned about, he called out the only words that could work in a place like this. I brought food. That was the beginning. He didn't film at first. He sat. He listened. He waited. A gift, a conversation, a photograph, a small exchange between strangers trying to measure the space between them. Over time, the Whitakers allowed the camera closer. It captured things no one had ever seen. The way Lorraine's laughter filled the hollow air. The way Ray's grunts became language, if you paid attention. The way Betty managed the household like a keeper of ritual. Small chores, gentle corrections, the rhythm of a life held together by repetition and instinct. The photographs were quiet. But when they left Odd, the quiet broke. 2. The world reacts. When the images were published years later, they ignited the internet. Curiosity turned to obsession. The photographs spread across forums and video essays, each viewer calling it something different. Tragic, fascinating, monstrous, beautiful. The word that followed them everywhere was inbred. A word that doesn't describe biology as much as it reveals the cruelty of those who use it. What outsiders saw as deformity, locals understood as inheritance, generations of people surviving poverty, isolation, and neglect in a region forgotten by progress. There were genetic ties, yes, but what shaped the Whitakers most was not blood, but abandonment. Oh, as the story grew, so did the discomfort. People sent money, letters, offers of help. Others sent mockery, disgust, and threats disguised as concern. The same camera that once brought attention now brought intrusion. Odd became a map coordinate on the internet's dark curiosity tour. For a time, the Whitakers disappeared from view. Visitors were warned away. The gate closed again. But stories like this have a way of circling back. 3. The return. Years later, Laita returned to Odd, not as a journalist, but as someone who couldn't forget. The house was older now. Betty's hair had turned white. The yard, still guarded by dogs, seemed smaller. But the family welcomed him back with the same careful grace. He didn't come with questions. He came with groceries. The cameras followed quietly, capturing laughter that sounded like memory. He recorded conversations this time, slow, fragmented, shaped by silence more than words. The world watched again. Millions of views this time, but something had changed. The comments weren't only gawking, they were mourning. People saw, maybe for the first time, that the Whitakers weren't a sideshow. They were an echo of what happens when a society forgets entire regions and calls the survivors strange. 4. What the lens missed. The deeper truth is this: the Whitakers didn't choose isolation. Isolation chose them. Coal towns dried up, roads eroded, schools closed, the mountains kept people in and kept help out. Generations folded in on themselves. Marriage became a matter of proximity, not preference. And when outsiders left, the family stayed, because home, however broken, was still theirs. To see the Whitakers is to see the aftermath of neglect, not a curiosity. They are the living result of what happens when progress decides some places are too far to reach. Leiter once said, "When I met them, I didn't know whether to cry or be inspired." It's both, because tragedy and endurance often share the same face. 5. The price of exposure. Fame changed the family's life in strange ways. Donations poured in, some sincere, others stained with guilt. People drove to Odd, hoping for a glimpse, forgetting that human dignity is not a roadside attraction. The Whitakers accepted what they needed: repairs, clothes, medicine, and turned the rest away. They have learned what most of us forget, that attention is not the same as care. When the world looks away, they will still wake with the sun, still sit on the porch, still feed the dogs that guard their small piece of the earth. They do not need the internet to exist. They existed before it, and they will long after it grows tired of them. 6. The quiet legacy. Late one evening, as the day drained from the mountains, Betty stood by the gate and watched the photographer leave. The dogs didn't bark this time. He waved. She didn't wave back. She just nodded, as if sealing an unspoken truce between watcher and watched. For a brief moment, the flash of his car's taillights lit the yard red. Then it was gone, swallowed by the road and the hills. In Odd, West Virginia, the night returned to its rightful owners. The world would keep whispering their name: Whitaker, sometimes cruelly, sometimes kindly. But in the valley, nothing changed. The house still leaned, the porch still groaned. And a family, endlessly misunderstood, kept breathing in rhythm with the land that raised them. The camera does not blink, but the people watching do. They pause, rewind, zoom, frame, freeze. They call it curiosity, as if that word could soften the sound of intrusion. When the first photographs of the Whitakers spread, it wasn't a discovery. It was exposure, a private life unwrapped by a public too eager to stare. The line between seeing and watching has always been thin. To see is to acknowledge. To watch is to consume. What the world did to the Whitakers was not understanding. It was feeding. Every frame became a mirror for someone else's discomfort. People leaned closer, whispering words like inbred or backwards, as if labeling could disinfect the truth. But the truth was never disease. It was neglect. The poverty of odd West Virginia did not begin with the Whitakers. It began generations before, when the coal mines emptied and the jobs left with them. Towns like Odd were left to collapse inward, folding on themselves the way paper folds along its oldest crease. Families stayed because staying was the only choice that didn't cost gas money. The land that had fed them now fenced them in, and over time the fences became invisible until someone came looking for them again. When the photographer returned, his hands full of food and his voice soft, the family remembered him. Trust in places like this does not expire easily. It only hides. He filmed again, slower this time, aware of the cost of attention. Each frame carried weight now. Every click of the camera was an apology. What he captured was not spectacle, but persistence, the quiet rhythm of survival, unadorned and unashamed. The world watched again. Millions of eyes on screens. Some wept, others mocked, a few sent help. The difference between pity and empathy, it seems, is smaller than a comment box. The internet made the Whitakers a story again, but this time the story stared back. It asked, "What are you really looking at?" Every culture has its rituals for turning suffering into entertainment. In the past, it was freak shows and traveling exhibitions. Now it's algorithms and trending pages. The only thing that's changed is the ticket price. Viewers told themselves they were learning about hardship, shining a light, spreading awareness. But awareness without action is just another form of voyeurism. You can watch someone's pain so long that you start to believe it belongs to you. And yet, amid all that noise, the Whitakers remained untouched by fame in the way that matters. Their dignity did not ask for permission. It existed quietly, in the way Betty folded laundry, in the way Lorraine's laughter filled the space between words, in the way Ray stood guard by the fence. Dignity cannot be taken. It can only be ignored. The camera caught their faces, but it never caught their hearts. To understand them would require silence, patience, time, things the internet does not value. What people called strange was, in truth, human. What they called broken was continuity. The same bloodline, the same soil, the same unending work of making do. The story the world told about them was not their story. It was ours, a story about what we choose to look at when we cannot bear to look inward. There is a moment near the end of the last recording. The light is low. The dogs are quiet. Ray stands by the fence watching the photographer pack his car. The lens lingers, as if waiting for permission to leave. Ray turns, just slightly, his eyes catching the glow of dusk. The look he gives is not anger, not gratitude. It is understanding. It says, "You've seen enough." The road out of Odd curls away into the trees. Behind it, the house folds back into shadow. The screen fades to black, but the silence stays. Somewhere, people are still watching, replaying, discussing, but the family has already turned off their porch light. They are no longer the subject. They never were. The story of the Whitakers doesn't start with the camera. It begins long before, in a valley that forgot how to leave itself. Long before YouTube, before photographs, before words like viral had meaning. It starts with a family name carried from one century into another by people who had nowhere else to go. Generations ago, the mountains were full of men who dug coal by hand and came home coughing black. They built houses out of what they could find: rough timber, rusted nails, tin for the roof. They had children. The children stayed. When the mines closed, the roads stopped leading anywhere worth driving to. The towns that survived became islands of memory. The families that didn't move became their own history. Isolation is not a choice when the nearest neighbor is a ridge away and the world forgets your name. The Whitakers stayed because that's what families do when leaving feels like betrayal. They farmed until the soil quit. They hunted until the woods grew quiet. And when the country around them modernized, the valley held its breath. There are places in America where time doesn't stop. It simply refuses to begin again. Odd, West Virginia, is one of those places. By the time the 20th century reached them, the Whitakers were already legend. Locals whispered about the family up in the holler, the ones who kept to themselves, who didn't marry out, who spoke to one another in sounds half words, half weather. The stories changed with every retelling. Some said the bloodline was cursed. Others said it was simply small, folded in on itself too many times. Most people didn't want to know the truth. They preferred the myth. Myths are easier to handle than people. And so, the name Whitaker became shorthand for something people didn't want to face. It wasn't just about bloodlines. It was about failure, about poverty left to rot long enough to grow its own folklore. To outsiders, the family became an exhibit. To themselves, they were simply alive. The house, the dogs, the rhythm of their days, this was life as they understood it. Generations passed that way, each one learning how to survive without asking for help. When Mark Leita arrived in 2004, the last chapter of that isolation began to close. The family, worn but standing, became visible again. But visibility is a dangerous gift. Once seen, you cannot hide. Once named, you cannot choose silence. The photographs, the footage, the interviews, all of it pulled the Whitakers into a century that did not know what to do with them. They became both real and unreal, human and symbol, loved and pitied, mocked and defended. The same image that inspired compassion also fed cruelty. The same faces that people claimed to protect became the ones they exploited for clicks. It's strange how the modern world can destroy someone simply by looking too long. Exposure is a kind of radiation. It warms at first, then it burns. The Whitakers felt both. Donations arrived, messages poured in. Strangers drove through odd just to catch a glimpse of their house. The attention was supposed to help. Instead, it hollowed them out. The camera had given them a stage, but it had also built the cage around it. Still, through all of it, the family continued to live their lives. The dogs still barked when the mailman came. Betty still swept the porch when the weather held. Ray still stood guard by the fence, as if time itself needed watching. The world spun faster, but the Whitakers didn't move. Maybe they understood something the rest of us forgot, that fame is just another storm, and storms always pass. Years after the last visit, when the roads to Odd turned to dust again, and the videos stopped climbing in views, the story began to settle. People stopped asking what was wrong with the family, and started asking what was wrong with everyone else. The question had changed shape, but it had finally become the right one. Because the Whitakers were never the mystery. The real mystery is why the world keeps mistaking survival for tragedy. Why endurance, when shown in its rawest form, looks monstrous to those who have never needed it. Why poverty becomes folklore only when it belongs to someone else. Somewhere in Odd, the porch light flickers at dusk. Someone calls the dogs in. The wind carries the hum of an old radio through the trees, and for a moment, it feels like the whole valley is breathing in unison again. No one outside hears it. No one needs to. The family at the end of the road is still there. The world has moved on to new curiosities, new spectacles, new myths. But in the quiet of those hills, life goes on exactly as it always has, without apology, without permission, and without needing anyone to understand. The road to Odd ends the way it begins, quietly, with more silence than answers. Every curve looks familiar, every shadow feels remembered. It's the kind of place where even the wind sounds tired of traveling, where a name like Whitaker doesn't belong to a family anymore, but to the land itself. Years have passed since the world first came knocking at their door. The cameras are gone now. The internet has found new faces to dissect, new tragedies to turn into thumbnails. But in Odd, nothing much has changed. The same dirt road still curls through the trees. Same dogs bark when a stranger passes. And inside that weathered house, the same rhythm of life keeps time with the hills. You could call that survival. You could also call it peace. Because when the noise dies down, what's left is the truth. They never asked to be seen, and they never needed to be understood. The world wanted a spectacle. What it found was a mirror. Every cruel joke, every viral comment, every voyeuristic click said more about us than about them. People thought they were staring into an abyss. But the abyss was their own reflection. Fear of decay, of poverty, of being left behind. The Whitakers endured it all, without a word. They lived as they always had, as their parents had before them. A pot simmering on the stove, a worn Bible on the table, a radio murmuring half-static gospel, the small faith that tomorrow would look like today, and that would be enough. In the evenings, the house turns gold under the low sun. Betty sits by the window, her hair a white halo in the last light. Ray moves through the yard, slow and certain, calling the dogs home. The hills stretch long shadows over everything, and the air hums with the sound of crickets and the breathing of a family that the world has finally left alone. People still whisper their names sometimes in fascination, in judgment, in pity. But the family at the end of the road doesn't hear it anymore. And maybe that's mercy. Maybe some stories aren't meant to be followed forever. Odd, West Virginia, fades behind you as you leave. A handful of houses, a broken mailbox, a road that winds back into the forest. The sign at the edge of town says nothing about the Whitakers. It doesn't need to. Their legacy isn't carved in words. It's carried in silence. Because survival, in its purest form, makes no sound. It doesn't need our applause or understanding. It exists, quietly, stubbornly, against everything that tries to erase it. And in that stillness, the story ends not with revelation, but with respect. The Whitakers remain. Their house, standing like an old heartbeat. Their lives, folding into the dusk. Their names echoing in the trees that have seen too much and still keep their secrets. This is Deep Night Whispers. The night listens. And somewhere in Odd, a light still burns.